So that gets us to the next of our assignments. And for this one, we're talking specifically about assignment number 50, which is all about font history. For this one, you're going to be writing about, and I'll describe a little bit more about that in a second, the details of what you're writing, but you're going to be writing about font history. And you're going to be doing this into the discussion area in Blackboard, which is this item. So you're going to click on, obviously you'll read this information. Again, more on that in a second. You will click on the link here, and I'm in the my view and not the student view right now, but it takes you into, I'm trying to see if I can make this small enough that you can see it in this little window. It'll take you into here, and you're going to click on create thread, and you're going to write about your chosen topic in terms of font history. And you're going to see another summary from that main screen. It's just the way the setup works. So summary of that information again at the top. You're going to give it a subject or a title, and then you're going to put your message content in. Consider proper grammar, paragraph formatting, complete sentences, all that kind of stuff, and include a sample image of whatever it is that your subject happens to be about. And again, I'm going to talk about that in a second, but I wanted to talk about the how you're going to do it bit before I talked about the specifics of what you're going to do. And then you're going to submit. Now, what exactly are or can you write about? And that's where all this comes into play. So you're going to choose a particular typeface if you're picking something from the more modern end, which is the right hand side over here, or a technique or style or technology depending on your approach. If you're picking something from the left hand side, in particular the upper portion of the left hand side, or possibly even a type designer in some of the cases, starting with about the 15th century, which doesn't seem modern, but we're actually talking about thousands of years of type history here. So when we're talking about type, we are talking about the way a culture communicated, and very often whatever their communication methodology was that was used widely was a fairly exciting, widespread technology to whatever that culture is. So while a pictogram to us seems ancient, because obviously at this point it is ancient to us, it was a fairly cutting edge technology to the people that were doing it. They had figured out how to make marks that were persistent. If it was on the inside of a cave, they were probably using charcoal or local pigments, and that type of thing. And eventually pictograms became language and alphabet of a written sort, and that's what this history is all about, is we're actually tracing human history by tracing type or font history. If you want to go really old school, then you can absolutely do pictogram or ideographs or hieroglyphics, which of course is the Egyptians, into the Phoenicians, which is one of the first places that we start to see an alphabet that's a little bit more recognizable to us. Now, if you, like many people, are looking at this teeny weeny summary and you can't even tell what the heck it says, your eyes are pretty normal. If you can read it, you're amazing. I have linked a larger version, the proper original version of this timeline from the main page, and I'll also link it from the discussion area that I just had up a second ago so that you can actually view it larger and read what the heck this thing says. And again, with the oldest stuff, which is the stuff at the top, you're not going to find a particular individual that did this. You're looking at the overall technology or communication technique. The further down you go, once we get to Gutenberg, he was a printer, 1400, so like 1450-ish. He is the first Westerner who is credited with movable type. Prior to Gutenberg in the West, and the Koreans actually apparently figured this out at least 100 years beforehand, but we're talking about a Western calendar, so we're going with Gutenberg here. But he figured out how to use individual movable characters that could be used like stamps, broken apart, and reused. And that was a revolutionary concept. Prior to Gutenberg, if you wanted to print a book, you had to make what was effectively a giant stamp for every single page. And to save it, to print it again, you had to save however many pages of these thick metal plates. Well, the metal was expensive. You might need to reuse it, so very often it was melted down and reused for the next thing. So if you wanted to go back and print the previous book, you couldn't because the stamps had been melted down without starting all over again. So setting up for printing was really expensive and really time consuming. With Gutenberg, he figured, what if we had a whole bunch of letters, and every time we wanted to print or arrange something, we could just reuse those letters and move them around. So you could print an entire book with a fraction of the amount of metal that you would need in order to print using the individual plates, and you could print in a fraction of the time. So the reason this is important is that books become cheaper. When books are cheaper, more books are printed, which makes them still cheaper, and different types of books are printing, and that's sort of where we headed. After Gutenberg, designers like Claude Garamond pop onto the scene because until you had movable type, you didn't necessarily need that many typefaces because not that much was being printed. So starting in the late 15th century, so 1450s, 1490s, and so forth, we have actual type designers that are starting to come onto the scene. And a lot of these classic type designers are still, I mean, they're dead, obviously, but their typefaces or versions of them are still in use. Claude Garamond, William Caslon, John Baskerville, and so forth are all really well-known designers who have typefaces that bear their names that are still in use today, and so forth and so on. So when you're looking through this list, and I'm not going to talk a lot more about the history bit of it because you can read it, is you're going to pick something that grabs you. If it's hieroglyphics, great. If it's William Caslon IV, great. You are going to write about the technique, or the person, or if you really become fascinated by a particular typeface and why somebody made it look the way it did, then that's fine too. But you're going to write a couple of paragraphs about the designer, the technique, or the typeface, and you're going to provide an example of it. When I say a couple of paragraphs, I don't mean 2 sentence fragments. I mean several sentences for paragraph 1, several sentences for paragraph 2. It doesn't have to be a deep history, but it is more information than is featured here in this little tiny infographic. If you keep looking, you'll see that it keeps going into contemporary stuff. And what you find happens starting with the personal computer is typography explodes. And all of a sudden, we go from a relatively small number of hundreds of typefaces to now millions of typefaces that are being designed and refined and changed and developed all the time. So you can absolutely pick somebody that isn't on this list. This is, again, similar to the art history, meant to give you a guideline, but you're going to write about either a designer or a typeface or a technology or technique. You're going to pick one of those and do the discussion post about it.